Welcome to today's story. A story of pain, betrayal, and resilience. Fred could hardly believe his eyes. He had returned home after years of sacrifice in Saudi Arabia, expecting to see the new house he had worked tirelessly for. But there was a problem. He was greeted by a pathetic shell of a structure, a small, crooked building with rough, unpainted walls and a rusting tin roof that barely looked capable of keeping out the rain. It was nothing like the house he had imagined. Fred's chest tightened as he tried to make sense of it. Over the years, he'd sent millions of Kenya shillings to his father, Samuel, certain that the money was being used to build a home that would elevate his family from the harsh realities they had endured and at least keep the poverty they had been brought up in at bay. At that moment, he did not know that the painful truth would shatter him to pieces. As he stepped forward, his siblings approached, their eyes downcast, faces somber. One by one, they told him the painful truth. His life would never be the same again. Let's go back to where it all started, the beginning of the struggle. Fred was born to Samuel and Monica in a small rural village in Kericho County, Kenya. Samuel and Monica were peasant farmers who owned a tiny piece of land that barely produced enough food to feed their family. Monica, a resilient and loving woman, worked from dawn until dusk, making sure that the family never went hungry, even if it meant taking on odd jobs in neighbors' fields. Samuel, however, had a habit that consumed most of his earnings. With each 300 shilling payment he got as a casual laborer at local tea farms, he'd head straight to the local illegal brew den run by a local woman, who many referred as Mama Bima, spending every last coin on alcohol. Other times, you would find him along the dirt road alongside other men waiting on a politician, the area MCA or the MP, for at least 50 shillings to keep the soberness away, one glass at a time. Mama Bima, a woman who had been to the local police cell many times but always coming out, never really understood the pain that her harmful brew brought to many families, most of which had lost a father to the glass of the colorless yet bitter addictive drink. The local chief and the police were always on Mama Bima's neck, but she would be out the next day after giving out something small. She was infamous, like her drink, for all the bad reasons. The infamous brew, Changa, Kenya's Kill Me Quick brew, is a drink you sip if you're ready to gamble with life, or just out of options. Brewed in hidden shacks with random ingredients, and who knows what else. It's known for its lethal potency and special taste, like fire with a splash of regret. Communities suffer, friends fight, homes break, and family fortunes drain faster than a glass of the stuff. It's the poor man's path to a foggy escape, but all too often it's a one-way ticket. Chang'an brings short-lived laughter, but leaves long-lasting sorrow in its wake. Sip if you dare. Samuel always appeared happy with his friends taking in the illicit brew den, where they spent most of their time with no care about anything or anyone in the world, not even their families. Wives were left to be the breadwinners in many homes. Sad. People tried to understand him. He seemed distant and absent-minded when sober, mostly in rare mornings if you could find him in bed. Samuel drank his sorrows away, not ever talking to anyone about what disturbed his mind. You see, mental health is a foreign word in Kenya, worse even in rural areas. Men are expected to be strong, not to appear weak. So they drink all their sorrows away in the cheap, yet harmful drink that many have lost their eyes to, literally. Even their wives have no idea who they married when they start to sip. As with each glass, addiction sinks in, deeper and deeper. At night, the entire village would hear him stumbling down the dirt path, shouting profanities and cursing the neighbors, sometimes even cursing the sky. It was common to hear him screaming at night, and he would occasionally talk in English as if to show everyone he had gone to school up until college, although there was nothing to show except for his degree, which was gathering dust in the big metal box his grandfather had gifted him. His children would scatter at the sound of his voice, hiding in the darkest corners of their tiny, round, mud-walled hut that served as both a kitchen and the main house, hearts pounding. This was a routine they knew too well. The neighbors pitied Monica, who had to bear the weight of his alcoholism and make up for his neglect. Although Monica had not studied past class 8, she was organized and worked hard. The children's needs were met through all her effort. Monica somehow managed to keep her children together, with Fred being her pride and joy, a bright, hard-working boy who showed great promise. You see, Monica got married to a different man. Samuel used to work as a manager at a local tea factory until he lost his job due to alcoholism. This was when life started changing for them. It became harder. Samuel drank more. With each sip, he sank deeper and deeper into the unknown world. Fred was the eldest of 5 children. He had big dreams, even though his reality seemed hopelessly small. He excelled in school, dedicating himself to his studies in hopes of one day escaping the cycle of poverty that held his family captive. Every day he'd walk several kilometers to the local primary school, motivated by the thought of a better future. This was his dream, a dream that many children in Kenyan rural areas pray about. However, life was about to take an unexpected turn for the family. Tragedy strikes. One cold morning, everything changed. Fred was just 12 years old, in class 6, when his mother Monica fell ill. With no money to afford proper health care, her condition worsened quickly, and she passed away, leaving an irreplaceable void in the family. Her death shattered Fred's world. He lost not just his mother, but the one stable force that held their fragile family together. Samuel's drinking escalated after Monica's death. He became even more distant, consumed by his own sorrow, but never able to express it in any way other than through anger and self-pity. Fred tried his best to keep going to school, but as the eldest, he now bore the responsibility of caring for his younger siblings. He quickly found himself stretched thin, trying to be both a parent and a pupil. Eventually, he started to miss school, as no one else could provide for them. At school, teachers took notice of the family's situation. They allowed Fred to come to school later at times. They even made sure the children had lunch at school. Still, this was not enough. The children needed more, so Fred would skip school, sometimes for weeks. The local chief took notice and summoned Samuel multiple times, warning him that it was against the law for a child to stay out of school. For a brief time, Samuel would try to act responsibly, showing up sober, attending meetings, and pretending to care. But it never lasted. After a few days, he would return to his ways, sinking back into his nightly drinking sprees. Sometimes, the children would go to bed hungry, their stomachs aching as they lay awake, listening to their father stumble through the village, his drunken voice carrying through the night. Without their mother's nurturing presence, life became a relentless struggle. The family's one cow died, robbing them of a crucial source of milk. You see, having a cow in rural Kenya is a blessing. You may be fighting for food, but at least have some milk. Fred knew he had to step up. From a young age, he took on any job he could find. Working in tea plantations, collecting firewood for neighbors, he did anything. He became known in the village as a dependable young man who would work tirelessly for a few Kenya shillings to feed his family. Some gave him maize, some milk, others paid well, and others made him work for free. Some were good to him, some empathized with his situation, and others took advantage. Life went on. Such was life for Fred. A chance for change. Fred's life revolved around survival. By the time he was 25, he had spent over a decade working as a casual laborer. His siblings were now teenagers, some of them in high school, and he had managed to scrape together enough to keep them in school. Every day was a test of resilience, but he kept going, determined to give his brothers and sisters a chance to escape the life he had known. Then he heard of an opportunity to work in Saudi Arabia as a construction worker. It was a chance to earn a steady income, and though he knew it would mean leaving his siblings behind, he also knew that this was perhaps the only way he could provide for them on a larger scale. With some help from relatives and neighbors, Fred managed to raise the funds for his visa and airfare, bidding farewell to his family and the only life he had ever known. Like many Kenyan youths his age, he was affected by the country's unemployment crisis. He sang, "We left home to change home," as he boarded his plane with many other youths. Life in Saudi Arabia was grueling. The heat was brutal, often soaring to unbearable levels, and the working hours were long. Every day felt like a test of endurance, but Fred was undeterred. He had become accustomed to the tough life. He could not complain. He had a goal: to build a proper house for his family, a house they could be proud of, a home that would stand as a symbol of all the sacrifices he had made. His entire focus was on saving every possible shilling, sending it back home to support his siblings' education, and eventually to fund the construction of their new home. The dream of a new home. After 3 years, Fred had saved enough to start the house. He called his father, Samuel, who had promised over the phone that he was a changed man. Samuel spoke with a sincerity that Fred had rarely heard, pledging that he would oversee the construction and ensure everything was done right. Despite warnings from his uncle Gideon, who advised Fred not to trust his father, Fred chose to believe him, hoping that perhaps Samuel had indeed reformed. Over the next 2 years, Fred sent a total of 3 million shillings, certain that it would be enough to build a proper brick house. He called regularly, asking about the progress, and Samuel assured him that things were moving along smoothly. He even received some pictures of the progress. Fred saw a beautiful house come up, or at least that is what he saw. The thought of his siblings living in a real house, with proper rooms, and a roof that wouldn't leak, kept Fred motivated through the harshest days. The life he had gone through made him focus on his goal. He wanted to change home. Then came the day he'd been waiting for. He managed to get a short break from work and decided to surprise his family by coming home unannounced. He imagined the looks of joy and surprise on their faces, especially when they saw the house in its full glory. But as he walked down the familiar dirt road surrounded by tea plantations to their homestead, what he saw shattered every hope he had. There was no grand house, no sign of the structure he had envisioned. Instead, he was greeted by a crooked, unfinished building with rough, unpainted walls and a rusty tin roof. It was barely bigger than the mud-walled hut he had left behind. Thank you for following the story up to this point. Please subscribe. The betrayal revealed. Samuel had only spent a fraction of the money Fred had sent. He claimed he'd only received 150,000 Kenya shillings, using it to construct this poor excuse of a house. The rest? Gone. Whispers among the neighbors had revealed that Samuel had been living it up, buying drinks for anyone willing to toast with him, squandering the money that Fred had spent years sweating and suffering to earn. Fred felt his heart shatter into pieces, each one sharp and painful. The betrayal cut deep. Every late-night shift, every grueling hour in the heat of Saudi Arabia's unforgiving desert sun, all of it had been for nothing. He felt anger boil inside him, an anger that came from years of doing everything he could to care for his family, only to be let down by the very person he had trusted most. Fred's heart pounded as he took in the sight, unable to believe that this was what he had worked for all these years. His siblings approached him, their faces downcast. One of them, his youngest sister, hesitated before speaking. "Fred, Dad, he only spent a little on the house. He told everyone you only sent him 150,000 Kenya shillings." Fred felt a surge of anger and disbelief. "What do you mean? I sent 3 million Kenya shillings. Where is the rest of the money?" "Dad," James, his younger brother, trailed off, looking over his shoulder toward the house. "Dad told us he only received 150,000 shillings from you. He said he used it to build this structure." Fred's vision blurred as the weight of James's words sank in. 3 million shillings. 3 years of endless work. Every blister, every drop of sweat, all for this. James, I sent 3 million shillings, Fred said, his voice shaking. 3 million, where did it go? James's eyes filled with shame. I don't know, Fred. We all thought... Dad told us. Without another word, Fred marched toward the house, his heart pounding. He found Samuel sitting outside, lounging on an old chair, a glass of murky liquid in his hand. The now old man in his 50s looked up as Fred approached, a slow, arrogant grin spreading across his face. Fred, you're back, Samuel said, raising his glass in a mock toast. Don't Fred me, Fred shot back, his voice laced with anger and disbelief. Where is the house, the one I worked for, the one I sent 3 million shillings to build? Samuel chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. 3 million, eh? He scoffed, shrugging as though the figure were inconsequential. I told the kids, didn't I? I only got a small amount from you, Fred. You can't expect miracles with 150,000. Fred's fists clenched, his knuckles turning white. 3 million shillings, Dad. 3 million. Don't lie to me. I sacrificed everything to send you that money, to give this family a decent home. Samuel waved a dismissive hand. Oh, come on, Fred. You're making a big deal out of nothing. So what if the house isn't what you pictured? We've managed without fancy homes all these years. You're unbelievable, Fred said, his voice breaking. Where is the money, Dad? Where did it go? Samuel raised his glass, taking a slow sip of his bitter and colorless local brew that he loved more than anything, his eyes never leaving Fred's. Spent it, he said bluntly, a smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. You know how things are. Life's short, Fred. Got to enjoy it while you can. Fred's anger boiled over. You spent my money, my hard-earned money? While I was breaking my back in Saudi Arabia, working 12-hour shifts under that brutal sun? You were here, squandering everything? Samuel laughed, a hollow, careless laugh. Oh, don't be so dramatic. You'll make more. It's not the end of the world. I am your father, remember? Just then, Uncle Gideon, who had been watching from a distance, approached, placing a firm hand on Fred's shoulder. His voice was calm, but filled with quiet anger. Fred, I warned you about this. Your father. He's always been like this. Some people don't change. His siblings looked at each other, too afraid to speak. Then, a neighbor approached quietly, shaking his head. Fred, I'm sorry. Your father has been, well, he's been spending a lot of time in bars. He's been generous there, buying drinks for everyone. The whole village knows he's been wasting money. Fred's world crumbled. He had trusted Samuel despite everything, believing that perhaps this time he would change. But Samuel had betrayed him, taking advantage of his hard work and sacrifice. The realization sank in. His father had squandered his money on fleeting pleasures, leaving his family with nothing. Lessons in pain. As the night settled, Fred found himself sitting under the stars with his siblings huddled close, all of them trying to process the shock of their father's betrayal. The old mud hut still loomed in the background, a painful reminder of broken dreams. Fred, we're so sorry, whispered Miriam, his youngest sister. Her voice quivered, each word weighed down by the same pain Fred felt. We wanted to tell you, but we didn't want to hurt you. Fred shook his head, trying to hold back his tears. It's not your fault, Miriam. None of this is your fault. I just wanted you all to have a better life. A life without this. The bitterness gnawed at him. He thought of all the things he had given up, his youth, his health, his dreams of starting a family. He had put everything on hold, all for the sake of his siblings, for the family he had vowed to protect. And now it felt like everything he had worked for had been ripped away. In the days that followed, Fred tried to confront his father again, but Samuel shrugged off every attempt. "You're young." Samuel sneered one afternoon as Fred pleaded with him to explain. "You have time to make more money. I don't. You think I'm just going to sit around counting coins?" Uncle Gideon, seeing Fred's devastation, took him aside. "Fred, you can't change him," Gideon said. "Your father's decisions are his own, but you've done enough. You've given your siblings a chance, and they won't forget it. Your mother would be proud." "But what's the point, Uncle?" Fred replied, his voice filled with despair as painful tears started to fall. "I wanted to give them a home, something they could be proud of. Now we're still in the same place." Gideon looked at him, his eyes filled with sympathy. "Fred, sometimes life doesn't give us what we want, no matter how much we sacrifice. But your love and sacrifice are worth more than any house. Your siblings see what you've done for them. That matters." Fred spent his remaining days in the village trying to make peace with what had happened. He played with his siblings, listening to their stories about school, their dreams for the future, the lives they hoped to build. Though the bitterness remained, he found comfort in their laughter, in the bond they shared. Before he left for Saudi Arabia again, Fred gathered his siblings together. "I'll keep working," he told them. "I'll send money, but not through Dad. You'll tell me what you need, and I'll make sure you have it. School, books, food, you won't go without." The children nodded, each of them understanding, in their own way, the depth of his love. They had seen their father squander the money, seen the whispers in the village about his reckless spending. But they also saw Fred's commitment, his unwavering dedication to their future. As he boarded the plane back to Saudi Arabia, Fred carried a newfound determination. He would rebuild, but this time he would do it differently. He would save for his siblings, but he would also save for himself. He wouldn't let his father's betrayal define him. He had learned a hard lesson about trust, but he hadn't lost his capacity to hope. Years later, after working even harder, Fred watched as his siblings graduated from school one by one. They each found their own paths, carrying with them the lessons of resilience and sacrifice. They remembered their brother's unwavering love and the sacrifices he made for them, all in the name of family. Though Fred never built the grand house he once dreamed of, he built something stronger, a family that valued loyalty, love, and the strength to overcome. He learned that family wasn't defined by bricks or money, but by the sacrifices people make for each other. Fred would carry the scars of his father's betrayal for the rest of his life, but they became a source of strength, a reminder of his resilience. And in the end, he found peace, knowing he had done everything he could to give his family a better life. What do you learn from this story? Do you think Samuel was ever fair to his family? Do those hooked up in the drink realize the pain they cause to those around them? How can we become better parents to our children? How can we take care of our brothers and sisters and take on the responsibility without feeling overwhelmed? How do we rise after betrayal from those close to us? Tell me in the comments. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you learned something from this story. Cheers, and have a good one.